Wolfgang Schäuble, a leading advocate of Greece's tough austerity programs and one of Germany's most powerful politicians, became famous for his no-nonsense approach on austerity. As the German finance minister, Schäuble urged Greece to stop blaming others for its financial woes and stick to a reform agenda instead of relying on debt relief. A popular hate figure among Greeks, Wolfgang Schäuble enjoyed high popularity ratings in Germany during the controversial political debate about the financial EU bailouts for Greece. According to the German opinion poll ARD Deutschlandtrend, the approval of Schäuble peaked with a value of 76% in July 2015 when the Greece crisis was aggravating. His high popularity was considered to be significant as it was largely attributed to his strict handling of the negotiations. However, to what effect did the journalistic frames of Schäuble's political position have on media-consuming recipients and the German public? According to framing theory, a prominent concept in social psychology and communication research, framing, on the one hand, can be described as a selective awareness of features of the reality and, on the other hand, as a structuring tool for content communication. A single frame can therefore be defined as the central organizing idea or storyline that provides meaning. Citizens mainly receive political information or news from TV, the print media and the Internet. Therefore, news flows seem to be controlled by producers and journalists. They determine what kind of news is comprehended as relevant and which aspects of an incident are chosen. Once a piece of news is perceived as important, reports on this incident are not presented incoherently. Instead, they are placed into a specific context that allows the recipients to form an opinion about the framed issue. Thus, framing occurs on two different levels. First, journalists write their articles against the backdrop of their perspective and interpretation schemes. Second, recipients also look at media reports through their own lens. Coming to the phenomenon of Wolfgang Schäuble's strong approval ratings, there were two main frames in action: the issue frame, which contains the political conflict, referring to the third EU rescue program for Greece and the inconsistency between two opposing positions. Second, the personal frame outlines the personalities of the German finance minister and his Greek counterpart Yanis Varoufakis and their personal polarization.
Schäuble repeatedly locked horns with the then Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis.
Despite an intense and open discussion, we do not agree about what we have to do now.
We agree to disagree.
Some journalists tended to analyze the duel between the two protagonists by utilizing the tools of the game theory, game frame. Much of the media coverage did not primarily focus on the content of the negotiations but solely on the clash between the two ministers. The media tend to focus more on political players and their personalities, thus setting personal frames, than on abstract institutions. This also explains the general public interest in the person of Wolfgang Schäuble. He is one of the two main actors in the conflict frame and becomes the hero of the Germans in the subsequent game frame, which simply consists of the duel between the German and the Greek minister. As the interest of the German population in Wolfgang Schäuble was successfully triggered, the more information about him was made available, the more his political position and his actions became understandable, and the more his approval rating skyrocketed with regard to his personal clash with Varoufakis. The issue, conflict frame and the personal game frame, as well as the strong and frequent presentation of Wolfgang Schäuble as a person in the media, led to solidarity of the German citizens with their Minister of Finance and attributed the responsibility for the crisis to other political actors. Indeed, Germans in that process seem to have forgotten their post-war history. The Internet is heaving with stories about the 1953 London Debt Accord, the summit where Germany's creditor nations reached an agreement cancelling more than half of the debt accumulated following the First and Second World Wars. Take a recent interview between Thomas Piketty and the German newspaper Die Zeit that's gone viral on social media. When pressed by Die Zeit's interviewer, the typically restrained superstar economist bursts out indignantly at the suggestion that it's only fair for Greece to pay what it owes. When I hear the Germans say that they maintain a very moral stance about debt and strongly believe that debts must be repaid, then I think, what a huge joke. Piketty exclaims, "Germany is the country that has never repaid its debts. It has no standing to lecture other nations." Small but vocal minorities of German economists, such as Heiner Flassbeck, have been making this exact point for years. In Germany, unfortunately, the historical lessons are not even discussed, Flassbeck declared in 2013. Nobody knows what happened, really, to Germany, what happened to the Germany reparations payments, that they were cancelled. But there's a problem with this interpretation. It is at the same time both overly patronizing to Germans as well as overly charitable. The language of forgetting, the suggestion that nobody knows, presumes that Germans are simply unaware of the past. It suggests their history books gloss this reality, that leading politicians and economists alike have never heard of the 1953 London Debt Accord. Perhaps the way that the 1953 London Treaty has been reported in the press lends some reinforcement to that suggestion. The London Debt Accord was originally called the Agreement on German External Debts. The fact that this longer title has been shortened to its more common moniker, conveniently expunging any mention of Germany at all, has the same rhetoric efforts as our tendency today to label the Eurozone crisis as the Greek debt crisis. Our penchant for magnifying Greece's role conveys the impression that wealthy nations and private stakeholders were entirely blameless. It skirts any attention, for example, to the creative accounting loopholes engineered by stakeholders such as Goldman Sachs to help Syriza's predecessors in office to mask the scale of Greek debt.
In Europe, we have good reason not to provide financial assistance without demanding something in return. And we do not provide help if a country doesn't use it to help itself. A lot of people underestimate the problem of moral hazard. But if you separate decision-making power from accountability, and if you separate opportunity from risk, you can't succeed. Debt relief and permanent transfers wouldn't solve a single structural problem. They would weaken the incentives to carry out reforms. And they would create a problem of moral hazard in political terms, namely the experience and expectations that others will bear the cost of a country's own actions or failure to act.
And yet, can we really attribute this impressive spectacle of German amnesia to a mere semantic name change? Is it really plausible to suggest that, nobody knows, Germany had 60% of its external debt written off with the stroke of a pen at the 1953 Agreement on German External Debts? The problem is not that Germany has forgotten its past. The problem is that Germany is willfully choosing not to remember. A growing literature in sociology and economics helps to understand why Germany might wish to willfully deny the relevance of lessons from the past. Contrary to seeing ignorance as a passive state, strategic ignorance can be a valuable political and commercial weapon, helping organizations and their personnel to deflect blame for past mishaps. During controlled experiments, economists have shown that individuals often deploy strategic ignorance in order to profit from business transactions that might seem morally repugnant to them if they were informed of the full repercussions of their actions. The notion of rational ignorance is a term coined by the political scientist Anthony Downs in the 1950s. As the legal scholar Ilya Somin has described in the Washington Post, rational ignorance is defined as situations where people make rational choices to forego knowledge that is easily available to them. Why might Greece's many creditors wish to carefully cultivate strategic ignorance of Germany's past debt relief? The reasons are legion, stemming from a desire to maintain the moral high ground during negotiations, to the danger of admitting openly that debt forgiveness can be one of the surest paths to economic prosperity, just as it was for Germany following the Second World War. Admitting this reality doesn't simply run the risk of letting Greece off the hook for its debts. It risks setting a precedent that chills the guardians of the current system of global economic governance. Strategic ignorance is useful not simply for the Troika in Europe, but lenders across the world fearful of the looming worldwide debt crisis that has been simmering since the 2008 financial crisis. Between 2008 and 2012, as the Global Policy Forum reported, external loans to low-income countries increased by 75%. As a result, 2/3 of impoverished countries face large increases in the share of government income spent on debt payments over the next 10 years. The pain felt by these countries is always someone else's gain. On a side note, it is interesting to mention that after the conditions for a third rescue package were agreed upon, Schäuble never again attained comparably high ratings. It could be argued that the reason for this development was the diminishing number of press articles on the issue and the change of tenor. Frames providing a solution to a conflict have a lower journalistic valence.
The former head of the German parliament, Wolfgang Schäuble, has died. The CDU politician first entered the Bundestag in 1972. Between 1989 and 2017, Mr. Schäuble served as Minister for the Interior and Finance under Chancellors Helmut Kohl and Angela Merkel. He was known internationally for backing austerity measures on Germany and the rest of the EU during the Euro crisis in 2009 and 10. What is Schäuble most likely to be remembered for, Nina?
I think the first thing internationally that people will associate with the name Wolfgang Schäuble is that he was probably the archetype of a German finance minister. He held that post for 8 years in that crucial period for the Eurozone, so that group of countries that share the currency, the euro, from 2009 to 2017. He stood for strict public finance policies and balanced spending with not too much debt, and the Eurozone crisis in the years from 2009-10 onwards saw him labelled as Mr. Austerity, and he became a much known and disliked figure in Greece, above all when he insisted on austerity programmes in southern European countries, arguing that was necessary to keep Greece and others in that common zone.
The above raise an explosive yet crucial social question. Could democracies be harmed by powerful framing effects about politicians?
The German government that demanded, after the banks started to fall, that the European Commission impose new rules on countries like Greece, forcing them to adopt hugely destructive tax-raising powers in return for bailouts and loans. A decade on, stagnant economies and huge unemployment levels are what's left. The proceeds went to the banks, not the people. Many economists hold Germany directly responsible for bankrupting Greece.
It is a very anti-democratic approach, but it is something that gives assurance to German politicians that there are rules and that they can be adhered to and that things will work out. But I think that kind of comfort is illusionary.
In its defence, Germany would argue that if other countries had behaved in the right way in the first place, then there wouldn't have been a problem. Most of the political class here bears few regrets about driving policies which proved so controversial.